And on day 5, we're going to be taking a look at Doomed Megalopolis. And it happens to be a historical fantasy horror. And it happens to be based after a novel called Teito Monogatari. And unfortunately, I haven't read it, but it would be something I would like to check out eventually. But before we talk about the film, one thing I have to mention is that the front cover of this movie is pretty fucking badass looking, and yeah, it looks a lot like M.Bison, doesn't it? But just to let you know that this OVA actually came out before M.Bison in Street Fighter 2. So it makes me wonder if they were inspired by that. Also, one last thing I have to mention about the cover is that the artwork was actually done by Noriyoshi Orai, who is definitely one hell of an artist. Probably his most famous artworks would have to be the stuff that he did for the Godzilla franchise. But with that all said and done, now let's start talking about the story. So it begins in the 1920s of Japan. And it talks a little bit of backstory on the character Masakato, who was a real-life samurai. And pretty much in this story, he was executed for his crimes, and he also left a bad spirit behind. And then we get introduced to our main antagonist here, who happens to be Yasunori Katō. And he's an evil sorcerer who wants to destroy the city, but the only way he can do that is by awakening the spirit of Masakato. But it's not as easy as you might think to be able to awaken a spirit such as this. So his plan is to kidnap someone with very strong psychic powers, and that person just happens to be someone named Yukari. And Yukari is good friends with our main protagonist, Naritaki. Although I have to mention, there are other characters within this one that do play just as much as an important role as he does. Like another very important character in this one would be Yukari's brother, being Yoichiro. And he's pretty much a workaholic. And Naritaki's role in here is that he's the one that wants to take care of Yukari, but also he ends up telling her brother that stop being a limp dick and you need to take care of your sister, you stupid fuck. Obviously, he didn't say it like that, but you get the picture. But yeah, Naritaki is the one that really wants to put a stop to Kato's plans for that he really fucks with his head and even fucks with her. But he can't do all this alone, so he ends up seeking help from a traveling sorcerer who happens to be an old man named Hirai. But at the same time as all this, there is also a other subplot going on that does connect between this, and that happens to be an architect who wants to build a city underground. So yeah, that's the basics of what you need to know about this one, and yeah, there's a lot more I could talk about with this one, but the thing is, I don't want to be here for like half an hour and turning this into like an entire analysis video or some shit. But one thing I should mention before we move on is that there is a lot of fucked up scenes within this one. It really is quite a trip, but I wouldn't say it's quite the level of trippiness of something like Paprika or anything. But I figured I'd mention that because that's really the most like horrifying thing about this one that makes it a horror, is that there is a lot of fucked up scenes. And you really have to see them to believe them. But yeah, let's get moving on to the other things like the animation. And the animation here is actually really good. Not only is it the flow of it that's really good, but also the setting is really awesome looking, and those acid trip scenes are done really well. And there's just something about the way how the black things are animated that it just looks extra creepy to me. And the animation on the blood and the gore on this one is pretty good too, but it's also not over the top and excessive. So it's kind of similar to what I said with Requiem of the Darkness, where that the violence itself, yeah, there's quite a lot of it, but it's not over the top, and most of the horror within this one is mostly with some graphic imagery. And I do like the overall art direction and the character designs, and yeah, I have to mention this again about the whole M.Bison thing. So yes, on the cover, Katō definitely does look like M.Bison here, but in the anime itself, he looks very scrawny and not nearly as buff. Although you could say that his outfit has like the same style as M.Bison, and yeah, that's quite true. Although I'd say he looks more like the main antagonist within Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner on PS2. But just without glasses and all. But one last thing I have to mention with the whole M.Bison thing is that the very first shot that you see Katō, it's in an area where everything is shaded red. So I found that to be kind of amusing. But anyways though, I really do like his design overall though. But yeah, the animation in general though, I do think is really good for the time. So now, as for the show's music, the music in this one is actually pretty fucking awesome. So you got a really good variety of tracks in here, so obviously as you would expect, you get a lot of atmospheric stuff which sound really good, and you get some really dark, epic sounding songs which really suit the tone, And on top of all this, you also get some heavy metal tracks, which are badass as fuck. Now, I'm sure some might complain that the heavy metal tracks don't really suit like an anime like this, for that they didn't have heavy metal music within like the 1920s. And while that is true, the thing is though, I did find that the heavy metal tracks did at least suit like the situation that was going on. They usually played whenever Katō was about to fuck some shit up. Also, all the ending songs within the episodes are really fucking great too. So overall, I really love the music within this one. I think it's really great, and probably one of my favorite parts about it for sure. So now, as for the voice acting in here, so if you're going to be watching this one in English, well, this might surprise you, but the voice acting in here, I actually kinda liked it. Now, you gotta keep in mind that it's not amazing by any means. I'm not saying it's, like, fantastic and that it's, like, absolutely perfect or anything, because obviously it's not. But for an early dub, it's really not bad at all. In fact, I'd say it's a lot better than most other older animes that got dubbed. And on top of this, the cast is actually pretty good too. So, Narutaki is being played by Cam Clark, which is always great. Although I wouldn't say it's his best role ever, not by a long shot, but I don't think it was bad. And then Katō is being voiced by Jeff Winkless, who is actually pretty awesome as him. For those that don't know, he also played Count Magnus within the original Vampire Hunter D movie. But then you got other ones like Mike Reynolds, Barbara Goodson, Wendy Lee, Michael McConaughey, Michael Forrest, Steve Kramer, Steve Bullen, and a couple others. But yeah, it's not amazing like I said, but I thought it was actually pretty solidly done for the most part, but I definitely do think that Jeff Winkless is the showstopper here. But as much as I'm saying that the voice acting here is not bad for the English, I have to say that the Japanese version is still better, mostly for the fact that I find it kind of suits the setting with this one much more. But one thing that I do know about the Japanese voices that I thought was kind of interesting was that the voice of Katō was Kyusaku Shimada, who also did play the same character within one of the live-action movies. So if you watch the two movies, Tokyo the Last Megalopolis and Tokyo the Last War, then you would definitely recognize his voice. So personally, I don't think you can go too much wrong with either one, but of course I do prefer the Japanese version a little bit more. So now, as for my overall thoughts on Doomed Megalopolis, is that I actually enjoyed this one. Now that might surprise a lot of people because this anime tends to get a bad rep, but I can totally understand why though. Because as much as I did enjoy this one, it does have its fair share of weird issues. So while I did like the characters, I do wish they could have been explored a lot more. Although I do think Katō is perfectly fine the way he is, but I'm talking about like a lot of other ones, like the main character, Narutaki. Because for a main protagonist, he really doesn't get a lot of screen time. And a lot of the other characters, I really can't remember their names to be honest. I mean, I remember what they do, and they are important to the story, but for some reason, I just can't remember their names. I don't even think they even said their names very often. Also, the pacing in this anime is a little all over the place, so it does have a little bit of a slow build-up. Also, some scenes can kind of have a really weird whiplash transition. For an example, you'll have a scene where people are talking about an old Chinese legend about a dragon underground, and then a couple seconds later go to some weird acid trip shit involving Yukari. So that's the majority of my issues with this one. Now I also have heard that some people thought that this anime was really boring, but for me personally, I didn't think it was boring at all, but I can understand why some people would think so. But I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the slow build up and weird pacing issue. So for me, the reason why I didn't find it to be that boring was that not only did I found that the very creepy scenes were just very intriguingly weird, but also whenever Katō got on screen, things were kind of exciting because you kind of wanted to know what kind of shit he was about to pull out of his sleeve. So knowing all this one is kind of hard to recommend to a lot of people. For that, I really do think it is one of those love it or hate it kind of things, but for me, well, I don't love it, but I definitely did like it for what it was. But I'd say if you do want something that is overall pretty whacked out, I do think this one wouldn't be a bad one given that it is pretty short with only 4 episodes lasting 40 minutes each. But as I said though, the slow build up and the awkward pacing issue might be a problem for some, so that's kind of the reason why that this one is pretty hard to recommend to a lot of people. But I still had some fun watching it though, even with some of its weird issues. But with that said though, I definitely do want to read the book someday, and maybe I'll even take a look at the live action movies. And there's even a video game on the PS1 that plays like a survival horror, but sadly no fan translation. So overall, doomed Megalopolis, and for some reason I keep wanting to say Metropolis, it's not going to be for everyone, but if this does sound at the very least interesting to you, I'd say it's worth a shot.